Hey friends, happy Wednesday, happy midweek. I hope that today has brought you great joy. In spite of the heat, I hope you found somewhere cool to be, whether it be home, whether it be work, wherever it is. I hope that you were able to cool off today because it's been a hot few days. But regardless of the heat, we've got a lot to be thankful for, a lot to be praising God for. But I don't know where you are spiritually or what your walk with the Lord looks like. But if you're not in a praying relationship, may I just challenge you this week to find some time every day to talk to the Lord. Because we got to be a church who leads the way. We've got to be a church who leads the way to showing people how to connect to a perfect God. And so I hope that you'll join me in doing that this week. And if you're not sure what to talk to God about, here's some things you can be praying for. The divide in our country. With coronavirus, with all the political agendas, with everything going on, we need to be praying for our country. Another thing is what's going on in Afghanistan. These are a lot of families that are being persecuted. Christians over there are being threatened with their life just because they believe in who God is, and yet they are remaining faithful even to the point of death. And I can't even fathom that kind of persecution, but families are being affected over there. And another thing is Haiti just got decimated by another hurricane, and a lot of families are being impacted over there. And I know that we have a lot of trouble in our own backyard, but guys, we are the church. There is no section, there is no divide. We are the church, whether you're in Afghanistan, whether you are in Haiti, whether you are right here in our backyard, we are the church, and we need to show unity together. And so let's be praying for our brothers and sisters who are hurting over there, and that could include your neighbor right across the street. So those are some things you can be talking to the Lord about. Tonight, we are going to be ending our midweek series on At the Movies. We've been talking the last few weeks of some of my favorite movies growing up, and we're going to end that series tonight with one of my favorite trilogies of all time called The Matrix. And I absolutely love The Matrix. It's a big staple of my childhood, and the great news about this is they're getting ready to release the fourth one coming up in the next year, probably. I don't know when the release date is. They're probably still working that out. But they're slowly giving us more details of what that movie looks like. And you may have watched The Matrix. You're probably like me. You love it because it's full of action. It's definitely a man's film. And if you love your man women, you've probably watched it with them. But if you haven't seen it, I'd really encourage you to do so. It's definitely an intellectual type of movie. It's definitely a thinker. You've got to watch it. There's a lot of philosophy, a lot of different ideas in there. In fact, they thought that maybe this was a connection to Christianity just because of some of the themes that surround the trilogy of this movie. And what this movie is about, it's about a hacker, a computer hacker, who is just kind of stuck in life. And little does he know that he is considered the one. And he has no idea what the Matrix is, but the Matrix is this alternate reality that is like a dream setting. They put you to sleep and you're kind of connected to this dreamlike state of mind. And in there, you have this reality that humans are now being controlled by a bunch of machines. And they are functioning, and they are basically being the energy to this mechanical world that was created by humans in the first place, but the humans gave over the control to the machines because they just developed them, and their AI became too powerful that they ended up adapting to the known world. And so the basis of the movie is nobody really knows what truth is anymore. Everybody's just kind of living a mundane life, and they're just going with the flow, and little do they know that they're actually being controlled by this alternate reality called the Matrix. And so what Neo does is he's trying to figure out what the truth is. And so this alternate reality versus what's real, and he's struggling in there. He's got some people. Morpheus is a guy who's trained him, and he gives him a little speech in the beginning of the first film where he basically tells them, listen, we're fighting a war that you don't see, that you can't hear, that you can't feel, that you can't smell, all these things, and you're a part of that. It doesn't make sense now, but as you progress through, everything will come to play. And so this is obviously confusing to Neo, which is his Matrix name, and he's just confused by all of it, but he's seeing the reality, and he's not sure if he's living in this dream or if this has become real life. And so this whole movie takes him as he is trying to combat the machines, which is Agent Smith. And it's really epic, slow motion, gunslinger type stuff. It's a really cool movie. And I know I've confused you because it's a really hard theme to help to understand, much less identify. So bear with me. So what I want to talk about tonight scripturally is what is a war that you and I are facing that we can't see, that we can't smell, that we can't taste, that we can't touch. And it's spiritual warfare. And one thing that baffles me about the church is there are a lot of churches who don't even believe in the possibility of spiritual warfare, much less recognize it or even talk about it. And I've noticed that in a lot of churches, a lot of places in our culture that just kind of neglect the idea of spiritual warfare, but yet it's one of the greatest topics in the Bible. Jesus refers to it a lot. We see a lot of demons being cast out and all this as part of the ministry of Jesus. And we get a lot of warning passages about Christians, how they need to guard themselves. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of that. But what I want to do with this midweek, because I'm going to do a whole series on spiritual warfare sometime this year. And so I don't want to get into all those details, but what I want to do is introduce you to what spiritual warfare looks like. And so at the beginning, we see this story in Revelation 12, is that there was angels, and angels are created beings. We have to understand that God created angels, but he also gave them free will as well. They got to choose. And so this angel named Lucifer, and you get to know a little bit about him in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, gives some pretty good characteristics of who this angel is. He's called the angel of light. He's one of the most beautiful beings ever created, and he kind of led the worship, I guess, if you want to call it that, in heaven. And so he's considered, some people would say, an archangel. You got Michael, you got Gabriel, and you got Lucifer, which is why in Revelation 12, when you hear about his fall, it says that a third of the stars fell with him, referring to angels. And those are what we call demons today. Why is this important to you? Well, I want to challenge you to read Revelation 12 on your own, but I want to give you a little section at the end of the chapter that basically talks about you and I. See, Satan fell we call him Satan, Lucifer, Satan, same character, ends up falling from heaven. Michael throws him down to the earth. He looks like this dragon. A lot of symbolism's going on in Revelation, and he's chasing this woman around. That's the concept of Revelation 12. But at the end, this woman is pregnant, and the child is Jesus, obviously. So he's trying to destroy all that. But at the end here, we see something very interesting. It says that the earth swallowed up the river that the dragon had tried to breathe out to help destroy the woman. The woman ends up escaping, and here's what happens. Verse 17 of Revelation 12 says this: "Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring." You know who the offspring are? He gives the answer to it right here. Those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. Who does that sound like? That's you and I. So spiritual warfare, Satan is coming after you. And I've heard it said many times that if you're a Christian, you can't be touched by Satan. Well, if that's true, then why are we having so many warning passages in the scriptures? Why is it saying here that Satan is going after those who keep God's commands and hold fast their testimony? That means he's coming after the church. He's coming after you and I. And so when people come into a relationship with Jesus, and they come and 5, 6 months later, years later, and they say, "Hey, I thought coming to Jesus, life was supposed to be better. Life was supposed to be great." And sometimes that just isn't the cause. You know why? Because you have now become an offspring of God. You have now become one who keeps God's commands and holds fast to the testimony of Jesus. You've become a target for the enemy. And he's going to come after you. And so we see a lot of warning passages like James 4:7 that says, "Submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you." Right? Or 1 John 5:18 that talks about that, spiritual warfare. And so what this connection is to the Matrix is that you and I are living in a war that we don't really know a lot about. And we don't see it, we don't hear it, we don't know anything around it. But the reality is that we're surrounded by both angels and demons, and there's a spiritual war going on that is heavy. And a lot of us have just become numb to it that we don't even recognize it anymore. Some of us have become so numb to this idea of spiritual warfare, whether you believe it or not, that you don't even realize that it's happening. And so what Paul does is he talks about the armor of God, that you and I as Christians, we need to protect ourselves from the enemy. And here's what he says in Ephesians 6, starting with verse 10. It says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood." Did you catch that? Verse 12, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So we've identified who the enemy is. So when you have conflict with your brother and sister, when you have conflict with your neighbor, when you have conflict with your coworkers, this isn't a flesh and blood type of situation. This is a demonic attack that is specified to coming after you. For our struggle, I'll read again, verse 12, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, Okay, so we have identified who the enemy is and what the battle is and where the struggle's at. Therefore, he says, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. So when you start to get when you start to get attacked, you can find balance. When you start to have the arrows of the enemy thrown and shot your way, this armor will help deflect that so that you can recall who you are in Christ, where your protection lies. So when that day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist. Okay, so truth, that's a weapon. With the breastplate of righteousness, there's another piece. With your feet fitted with readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. You see this all play out? And in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests with this in mind. Be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Be alert. And I think this is where it connects to the Matrix a little bit, is that they are living in this reality that they're not sure what truth is. And when you and I are living in a culture, living in an environment where we can't even identify truth anymore, I mean, just look at the culture around us. Nobody can really identify what truth is because we have a culture that tells you get to define your own truth, which is why we have 37 different genders, which is why we have all these wars that are based on things that mean absolutely nothing. And we've missed the point because we're fighting the wrong battle and we're trying to use earthly weapons in a spiritual context. And it's got to be reversed. We've got to start using spiritual weapons, spiritual armor in the physical. And it doesn't make sense to people who don't know God, which is why Jesus himself says it's foolishness for people that don't know. But for you and I who do, for you and I who are the church, this is where the battle is won. When you have the gospel of peace at your feet, when you have the breastplate of righteousness, when you have the belt of truth, when you stand on all of those things and you put those on, you start to identify what real truth is, the real reality of what's going on. And although you may not be able to see, be able to hear the enemy approaching you, you're always ready, you're always alert, and you start to see the things play out, which is why Paul says, be ready. And take all these requests to God, be alert, and always keep on praying for all of the Lord's people. And then he closes with this, pray also for me, that whenever I speak, words may be given to me so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. Where are you at with your journey? Are you fearlessly trying to move the gospel, to promote the gospel to the people in your life? Or have you allowed fear to creep in and just kind of doubt yourself, doubt your words, doubt your ability, even doubt God? Because if we're not careful, that's easy to do. And we can just become the mundane who just kind of keep going with the flow and doing all the right things and all the wrong things. And nobody really knows because we're just trying to figure out what truth is. Or you could be a pacemaker. You could be a trend setter by pointing people back to Jesus because you are equipping yourself with this spiritual armor, the spiritual necessities to fight a battle that you cannot see. So friends, I know that this was probably a confusing midweek. But there's a lot more to come on this topic, and we're going to dissect spiritual warfare a little bit later in the year. But just know that I've really enjoyed doing this series. You've gotten to know a little bit about me and some of the movies I'm into. Maybe you like some of the same movies. I don't know. And like I said, there's a lot that I could choose from because I like a good movie. But we're going to start a series next week, and we're calling it Debunked. And what we're going to do is take some really over-exaggerated verses of the Bible where people memorize these verses, but they've completely taken it out of context. And we're going to debunk those and tell you what the truth of the context and why those words were written and spoken. And so, hey, my prayers are with you, and we've got a lot to be thankful for, a lot to be praying for. But hey, be ready for this week as we come to worship God on Sunday. And of course, we'll be bringing you midweeks every Wednesday. Take care, guys.